When my mother-in-law demanded I transfer $28,000 to secure a VIP delivery suite for my sister-in-law, I stared at my phone in pure disbelief. She had forgotten one crucial detail. I am a forensic auditor, and I already knew the money was not for a hospital room at all. It was the exact amount needed to cover a margin call on a fraudulent brokerage account opened under my unborn daughter's stolen Social Security number. But before the financial ruin of my husband and his family unfolded, the true betrayal began at a party I was never supposed to find out about. My name is Natalie, 33 years old, and 6 months pregnant with my first child. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the outsider in your own family and had to fight back. The nightmare started on a crisp Saturday afternoon in downtown Chicago. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing my monthly credit card statements. My husband Spencer and I kept our primary finances separate, but we shared one emergency credit line. I scanned the digital transactions, and my heart skipped a beat. There was a pending charge for $15,000 paid to an elite event planning company. My hands trembled as I called the bank to verify. The representative cheerfully confirmed the charge was processed the previous day for a private event booked at the St. Regis Hotel. Spencer had told me he was attending a mandatory weekend seminar for his investment firm. He lied. I grabbed my car keys and my thick wool winter coat. The drive to the hotel felt like a blur. My mind raced with terrible possibilities. Was he having an affair? Was he hiding a gambling debt? The reality waiting for me was somehow much worse. I handed my keys to the valet and marched through the grand lobby of the St. Regis. The concierge directed me to the Astor ballroom where the private event was being held. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stopped dead in my tracks. The massive room was a sea of powder blue and silver. Huge arches of blue balloons stretched across the ceiling. Crystal centerpieces overflowed with white and blue hydrangeas. A towering 5-tier cake sat on a pedestal decorated with silver rattles and baby shoes. It was a baby shower. A lavish, incredibly expensive baby shower. And standing in the center of the room laughing loudly while sipping champagne was my husband Spencer. Next to him was his sister Vanessa, rubbing her slightly rounded belly. I stood in the doorway, my own 6-month pregnant belly, pressing against my heavy wool coat. I was completely uninvited to my own sister-in-law's baby shower. The event paid for with my emergency credit card. The lively string quartet playing in the corner seemed to fade into white noise as guests began to notice me. Conversations stopped abruptly. Women in designer dresses turned their heads whispering behind manicured hands. I recognized aunts, cousins, and family friends. All of them knew I was pregnant. All of them knew I was not invited. I took a step forward, but a firm hand grabbed my forearm. I turned to see my mother-in-law, Beatrice, glaring at me with eyes as cold as ice. She wore a tailored Chanel suit, and her grip was surprisingly strong. "What do you think you are doing here right now, Natalie?" she hissed, keeping her voice very low to avoid a massive scene, but the venom was entirely unmistakable. "You need to leave right now. You are ruining Vanessa's special day." I looked from Beatrice to Spencer, who had finally spotted me. Instead of looking guilty, he rolled his eyes and turned his back to me, whispering something to Vanessa that made her smirk. "My credit card was charged $15,000 for this party, Beatrice," I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I am paying for this event, and I am pregnant with your first grandchild. Why was I excluded from a family baby shower?" Beatrice let go of my arm and smoothed the front of her expensive jacket. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my sensible maternity clothes with absolute disgust. She leaned in close so only I could hear the sheer cruelty in her voice. "I thought Spencer made it clear." She whispered, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Vanessa is having a boy, a true heir to carry on our legacy. You are having a girl." And frankly, Natalie having a girl just is not our kind of celebration. Before the sting of Beatrice's words could fully settle in my mind, Spencer finally walked over. I felt a brief flicker of hope, thinking my husband would step between me and his mother to defend his unborn daughter. Instead, his hand clamped down on my elbow with a tight, bruising grip. He did not pull me into an embrace or ask if I was okay. He yanked me roughly toward the secluded hallway just outside the ballroom doors, away from the prying eyes of his wealthy guests. "What is exactly wrong with you, Natalie?" He hissed, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "My mother spent months planning this spectacular day, and you just barge in here like a crazy person. You are ruining her special moment and embarrassing me in front of the senior partners from my firm." I yanked my arm out of his grasp, staring at the man I had married 3 years ago, as if he were a complete stranger. "Your mother just told me that our daughter is not worth celebrating," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and profound betrayal. "And you are worried about her moment. Spencer, you lied to me to my face. You said you were at a mandatory financial seminar all weekend. Instead, you are here hosting a massive party using my emergency credit card. I want to know exactly why $15,000 was just withdrawn from my account." Spencer rolled his eyes and let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, as if he were dealing with a toddler throwing a temper tantrum. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair and leaned against the textured wallpaper of the corridor, looking completely bored. "You are being completely hysterical over absolutely nothing," he said, using that patronizing tone I had grown to despise. "It was a simple administrative mistake by the venue. My firm is sponsoring part of the event as a corporate write-off because several of our high-net-worth clients are attending. The event planner had your card on file from our anniversary dinner last year, and they charged the wrong account. I already told my accounting department to reverse the charge first thing on Monday morning. Stop acting like a victim and go home before you cause a bigger scene and ruin my networking opportunities." Before I could point out the glaring legal and logistical holes in his ridiculous story, the heavy ballroom doors swung open. Vanessa sauntered into the hallway holding a crystal flute filled with sparkling cider. She was draped in a custom-made silk maternity gown that clung perfectly to her curves, making her look like a radiant, glowing socialite. She stopped a few feet away, looking me up and down with an expression of sheer pity and disgust. "You really should listen to him, Natalie," Vanessa said, taking a slow, deliberate sip from her expensive glass. "You look completely exhausted, and honestly, that oversized wool sweater is not exactly fitting for the St. Regis Hotel. You look like you just finished a long shift at a grocery store. This is an exclusive private event for our inner circle. We are celebrating the arrival of a boy, a real heir to carry on the family name. You cannot blame Mom for wanting everything to be visually perfect and high-class today." I turned my gaze back to Spencer, waiting for him to tell his sister to back off. I waited for him to defend his wife. I waited for him to show even a fraction of the love he claimed to have for the child growing inside me. He did none of those things. He just stood there adjusting his expensive silk tie and checking the time on his luxury watch. "Vanessa is right," he said coldly, not even bothering to make eye contact with me. "You are clearly stressed, and your pregnancy hormones are making you completely irrational. Just go back to the house and rest. I will be home much later after I finish talking with my clients. Do not make this situation any harder than it needs to be." In that single freezing moment, the veil completely lifted from my eyes. The illusions I had held about my marriage evaporated into thin air. I looked at Spencer and Vanessa standing side by side, forming a united front of entitlement and sheer arrogance. They did not see me as family. They never did. To them, I was just a convenient background character. A sensible, quiet woman with a high-paying corporate job who could blindly fund their lavish lifestyle while they worshipped their golden child and his incoming heir. I realized I was completely alone. But as a senior forensic auditor, I knew that being alone was never a weakness. It meant I had no one left to protect but myself and my daughter. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply looked at Spencer and offered him a tight, perfectly composed, professional smile. "You are absolutely right, Spencer," I said, my voice completely void of emotion. I am going to go home and take care of my own business right now. Enjoy your party. I turned my back on them and walked down the long carpeted hallway, not looking back even once. As soon as I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out into the freezing Chicago wind, I pulled my smartphone from my coat pocket. I marched straight to my car in the parking lot, locked the heavy doors, and immediately dialed the direct line to the bank fraud department. It was time to cut the financial cord for good. For 7 straight days following the disastrous incident at the St. Regis Hotel, the atmosphere inside our home was thick enough to cut with a knife. Spencer decided the best way to handle my sudden departure from the baby shower was to treat me like a petulant child throwing a tantrum. He gave me the silent treatment, expecting me to eventually break down, apologize, and beg for his forgiveness. He slept in the guest bedroom and left for his firm before I even woke up. What he did not know was that his absence gave me the exact quiet isolation I needed to begin untangling our financial web. I had immediately reported the $15,000 charge as fraudulent to my credit card company. Because the event planner had no signed authorization from me, the funds were frozen and an investigation was launched. Spencer was furious when his firm was contacted about the disputed charge, but he still refused to speak to me directly about it. He assumed I was just being petty and would eventually give up. He vastly underestimated the resolve of a forensic auditor whose family had just drawn a line in the sand. Exactly 1 week after the shower, I was sitting in my home office. My dual monitors were glowing with spreadsheets, bank statements, and encrypted financial logs. I was meticulously tracking every penny that had ever moved through our shared accounts. My phone began to vibrate on the desk. The caller ID flashed brightly with Beatrice. I let it ring 3 times before calmly pressing the answer button and putting it on speakerphone. I did not say hello. I just waited. "Natalie, I am not going to play these childish games with you." Beatrice snapped, her voice dripping with extreme irritation. "Spencer told me you threw a fit and locked your emergency credit card. That was incredibly selfish of you, but I am willing to look past it if you fix the problem right now." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, resting my hands lightly on my pregnant belly. "What problem would that be, Beatrice?" "Vanessa is finalizing her birthing plan," Beatrice said, speaking as if she were addressing a slow toddler. "She is giving birth at Mount Sinai. We are booking the luxury VIP maternity suite so the family has a proper space to welcome the new baby. Spencer's secondary card was declined this morning for the deposit. We need $28,000 transferred immediately to secure the reservation. Wire it to my account today so I can handle the paperwork." I stared at the glowing screens in front of me. $28,000 for a hospital room deposit was an astronomical lie. Even the most elite suites in the city did not require that kind of upfront cash for a standard booking. My auditor brain instantly flagged the amount. It was too specific. It was not a medical expense at all. "Are you still there?" Beatrice demanded sharply. "I do not have all day, Natalie. Call your bank and authorize the transfer." I took a slow, deep breath, letting the sheer audacity of her demand wash over me. She had publicly humiliated me, banished me from a family celebration, and declared my unborn daughter unworthy. Now she was demanding my money to fund their delusions of grandeur. I leaned closer to the microphone. "When I asked you why I was not at the baby shower last week, you made your position crystal clear." I kept my voice deadpan and entirely devoid of emotion. "You said having a girl is not my kind of celebration. Well, Beatrice, having a girl is my priority now. And funding a fake hospital suite for your golden child is not my kind of investment. Tell Vanessa the true heir can pay for his own delivery room." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "You listen to me, you arrogant little brat!" Beatrice snarled, her sophisticated facade completely shattering. "You do not get to speak to me that way. You are Spencer's wife and your money belongs to this family. If you do not wire that money right now, I will have Spencer drain every single joint account you two share. He is the man of the house, and he has full legal access. You will be left with absolutely nothing." "Did I not warn you?" I replied coldly and pressed the end call button. The room fell completely silent again, save for the soft hum of my computer tower. I was not scared of her threat. I was fully expecting it. I turned my attention back to my right monitor and refreshed the banking portal for the joint checking account I shared with Spencer. A bright red security banner flashed across the top of the screen. Someone was already trying to initiate a massive wire transfer for $28,000 and failing repeatedly because I had changed the digital security tokens 2 days ago. The financial dominoes were officially falling. Less than an hour after my tense phone call with Beatrice, the heavy oak front door of our house flew open with a sudden violent crash. The hinges groaned in protest as Spencer stormed into the foyer. He did not bother taking off his expensive Italian leather shoes, tracking damp city slush directly onto the pristine hardwood floors. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He shrugged off his tailored wool overcoat and threw it carelessly over the banister before marching straight toward my home office. I remained perfectly still in my ergonomic chair, keeping my eyes locked on the glowing monitors in front of me. I had spent the last hour finalizing my encrypted backups and securing the remaining financial perimeters. By the time his heavy footsteps echoed against the tile of the hallway, I was completely prepared for the war he was about to start. He burst into the office and slammed his hands down on my mahogany desk so hard the coffee mug near my keyboard rattled. "You have exactly 1 minute to explain to me why you locked the joint checking account," he snarled. His voice was a dangerous low register meant to intimidate me. "My mother is standing at the hospital admissions desk right now looking like an absolute fool because the wire transfer was rejected 3 separate times. Unlock the account immediately, Natalie." I slowly rotated my chair to face him. I folded my hands over my pregnant belly, projecting an aura of absolute calm that I knew would infuriate him further. "I did not lock the account out of spite, Spencer," I said evenly. "I secured it because $28,000 is a massive unauthorized withdrawal, especially when it is being sent to your mother's personal account under the guise of a hospital deposit." I told her no. "And you do not have my consent to move those funds." Spencer let out a sharp, cruel laugh. He straightened his posture, looming over me in an attempt to use his physical size to force my submission. "Your consent," he mocked, shaking his head. "You seem to have forgotten how a marriage works. That is our money. And more importantly, you seem to have forgotten who provides the lifestyle you currently enjoy. You have been acting like a spoiled brat ever since last weekend. If you cannot respect my family and support my sister, you do not deserve to live under my roof. Unlock the damn account right now, or pack your bags and get out of my house." I did not flinch at his threat. Instead, I reached down and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope that I had retrieved from my fireproof safe earlier that morning. I tossed it onto the center of the desk, right between his planted hands. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet room. "Go ahead and open it," I said, leaning back. "Since we are suddenly discussing real estate and ownership, I think you need a quick refresher course on the actual facts." Spencer frowned, his arrogant expression faltering just a fraction. He snatched the envelope and pulled out the crisp legal documents inside. His eyes scanned the heavy cardstock and the certified seal of the county clerk. I watched the color drain completely from his face as he read the property deed. My name, Natalie Lawson, was the only one listed as the sole proprietor. There was no mortgage, there was no lien. And most importantly, his name was absolutely nowhere on the document. "You love calling this your house, Spencer?" I said, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. "But you did not pay a single dime for these hardwood floors or the brick exterior. I bought this property in cash 5 years ago before I ever even met you. I used the life insurance payout from my late father to secure my future. I let you move in here when we got married because I loved you. But do not ever make the mistake of thinking you have the power to evict me from a fortress I built with my own money. You are a guest here, and your welcome is rapidly expiring." Spencer dropped the deed as if it burned his fingers. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "Do not bother continuing this ridiculous lie about Vanessa needing a luxury maternity suite," I said. "I am a forensic auditor, Spencer. Did you really think I would not trace the routing numbers? I know exactly where every single cent of that $28,000 is going. It is not for a hospital room deposit. It is to cover a massive margin call for your failing stock account. Spencer's face went from pale to a deep mottled red in a matter of seconds. The arrogant smirk he had worn since the baby shower completely vanished, replaced by genuine panic. He took a step back from the desk, stammering about how I was crazy and making up wild accusations. But I did not give him the chance to spin another web of lies. I simply tapped a few keys on my keyboard and turned my primary monitor around so he could see the screen. This is what a forensic audit looks like. Spencer, I said, pointing to the complex financial flowchart I had built over the past few days. Did you really think opening an offshore shell company in Delaware would be enough to hide your tracks from a woman who literally uncovers corporate fraud for a living? I tracked the routing numbers from your secret brokerage account straight back to the initial wire transfers you made last year. You have been hemorrhaging money for months trading high-risk options and losing constantly. And now your broker is demanding $28,000 immediately, or they will liquidate your entire portfolio and come after your personal assets. Spencer stared at the screen, his eyes wide as he saw his entire financial reality laid bare in undeniable black and white. He realized in that moment that he was completely trapped. And like a cornered animal, he chose aggression instead of surrender. With a sudden feral shout, he lunged across the mahogany desk. He grabbed the edges of my expensive ultra-wide monitor and violently ripped it from the mount. He threw it onto the hardwood floor, where the screen shattered into a spiderweb of dead pixels and cracked glass. He did not stop there. He reached for my laptop, attempting to smash it next. I did not scream. I calmly rolled my chair back out of his reach, keeping my hands protectively over my stomach. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, watching him stand there panting with his hands clenched into fists. "Smashing a piece of hardware is not going to save you, Spencer. Everything you just saw is securely encrypted and backed up to 3 separate cloud servers, including a secure vault at my law firm. You cannot break the internet by throwing a monitor on the floor. All you just did was add destruction of property to your growing list of offenses." He leaned against the desk, running his hands through his hair, looking completely unhinged. "You do not understand," he pleaded suddenly, switching tactics from aggression to pathetic manipulation. "I was trying to build a massive nest egg for us. The market took an unpredictable downturn. If you just let me have the 28,000, I can save the account and flip it back to a profit. I did it for our family, Natalie. I did it for our daughter." That is when the final thread of my patience completely snapped. The sheer audacity of him mentioning our daughter made my blood run cold. I stood up from my chair, matching his height as best as I could. "Do not you dare bring her into this," I warned, my voice shaking with a cold, terrifying fury, because I dug deeper than just the routing numbers, Spencer. I looked at the actual registration documents for that failing account. I saw the name and the social security number attached to it. Spencer froze entirely. The little color left in his face drained away completely, leaving him looking like a ghost. "You needed a clean credit profile to secure the margin loan, because your own credit is maxed out," I continued, stepping closer to him. "But you could not use my name because my credit is heavily monitored. So you went to the dark web. You purchased a synthetic social security number, and you legally attached it to the name we had chosen for our unborn daughter. You committed federal identity fraud and used our child as a financial shield before she has even taken her first breath in this world." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. There was no excuse he could possibly invent for this. He had essentially destroyed his own child's financial future to fund his gambling addiction disguised as day trading. The betrayal was so deep, so incredibly vile, that I felt physically sick looking at him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. "I am done talking to you, Spencer," I said, unlocking the screen. "You can explain your investment strategies to the federal authorities." I began dialing the emergency number for the police. Spencer lunged forward again, screaming my name. But before his hands could even reach me, a loud, sharp ringing echoed through the house. The doorbell chimed 3 times in rapid succession. We both froze. Spencer looked toward the hallway in a panic. I cautiously backed away from him and walked out of the office toward the foyer. I looked through the peephole expecting to see Beatrice ready to scream about her delayed transfer. Instead, standing on my front porch with a grim expression and his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets was his sister Vanessa's husband David. I opened the heavy front door, keeping the chain locked at first. David stood on the porch holding a stack of envelopes wrapped in a thick rubber band. He looked exhausted. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and his usually immaculate posture was slouched. I unlatched the chain and pulled the door open just as Spencer came rushing out of the office behind me. Spencer grabbed his Italian leather coat from the banister without breaking his stride. He shoved past David, nearly knocking the mail out of his hands. "I have to go to the office and fix this," Spencer muttered, his voice shaking with a mix of panic and lingering rage. "Do not do anything stupid, Natalie. We will talk about this tonight when you have calmed down." He practically sprinted down the driveway toward his luxury sedan, leaving tire marks on the wet pavement as he sped away. I stood in the doorway watching his car disappear down the suburban street. My phone was still clutched tightly in my hand, the emergency dial screen glowing brightly. I took a deep breath and finally locked the screen, sliding the phone back into my pocket. I turned my attention to David, who was quietly watching me. We had never been particularly close. Vanessa treated him more like an accessory than a husband, parading him around when it suited her narrative of having a perfect modern marriage, but dismissing his opinions the moment they were alone. I always assumed he was just another pawn in Beatrice's grand game. "Vanessa got some of your mail delivered to our house by mistake," David said, holding out the stack of envelopes. "She wanted me to drop it off on my way to the office. I did not reach for the mail." I crossed my arms defensively over my chest. "Did Beatrice send you to intimidate me too?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Because if you are here to negotiate for Spencer, you can turn around right now. I just discovered my husband committed federal identity fraud against his own unborn child. I am not in the mood for family diplomacy, David." David let out a long, heavy sigh. He stepped inside and gently pushed the front door closed behind him, shutting out the freezing Chicago wind. He dropped the fake cheerful demeanor he usually wore at family gatherings. The exhaustion on his face deepened into something resembling pure defeat. "I am not here for Beatrice or Vanessa," he said quietly. "Honestly, I cannot stand being in the same room as them anymore. I came here because I knew Spencer would be cornering you, and I wanted to give you an out. I just did not realize how bad things had actually gotten. Identity fraud." He shook his head, rubbing the back of his neck. "I should be surprised, but I am not." I studied him carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "You are married to the golden child. You are supposed to be on their side." David let out a bitter laugh. "On their side," he repeated. "Natalie, I am a successful real estate appraiser with my own firm, but to them I will always be just the diversity hire for their family photos. Do you know how many times Beatrice has made passive-aggressive comments about my background? Or how Vanessa constantly complains that my salary does not match the lifestyle she thinks she deserves? They treat me like a high-functioning servant who is supposed to finance her country club memberships while smiling at their thinly veiled racist jokes during Thanksgiving dinner." He walked closer to me, lowering his voice even further. "I have been quietly separating my finances from Vanessa for 6 months, he confessed. "I am filing for divorce, Natalie. But before I pull the plug, I have been doing some digging of my own. As an appraiser, I have access to county property records and mortgage filings. I started looking into Spencer's recent transactions because Vanessa suddenly had a massive influx of cash to spend on that ridiculous baby shower." My auditor instincts immediately flared to life. "What did you find?" I asked, stepping closer. David reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He did not pull out the mail. Instead, he pulled out a small, sleek black USB drive. He held it out to me, his expression completely serious. "They are incredibly desperate, Natalie," he whispered. Spencer is drowning in margin debt and Beatrice is terrified of losing her social standing if he goes bankrupt. But they are not just trying to drain your checking accounts to save him. He pressed the cold metal of the USB drive firmly into the palm of my hand and closed my fingers around it. Take this and plug it into your secure computer, he instructed. You need to stop looking at the bank statements and start looking at the property records. They aren't just after your cash. Look at the house. I watched David turn his coat collar up and step back out into the freezing wind. He told me he could not stay any longer because Vanessa was tracking his location on his phone and he needed to get back to his office. I locked the heavy front door behind him, sliding the deadbolt into place. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely feel the cold metal of the USB drive pressed against my palm. I walked slowly back into my home office, carefully stepping over the shattered pieces of the monitor Spencer had destroyed in his rage. I sat back down in my ergonomic chair and stared at my remaining screen. I inserted the black USB drive into the secure port of my encrypted laptop. A password prompt immediately flashed on the screen. David had wrapped a small sticky note around the drive with a complex string of letters and numbers. I typed them in carefully and hit enter. A massive digital folder labeled appraisal records unzipped before my eyes. My heart pounded furiously as I double-clicked the first file in the directory. It was a comprehensive property valuation report, generated by David's real estate appraisal firm. The address printed clearly at the top of the page was my own. It was a formal legal assessment of the current market value of my house, complete with exterior photographs that had clearly been taken from the street over the past few weeks without my knowledge or consent. But the appraisal itself was not the horrifying part of the file. It was the thick stack of bank documents attached to the very end of the report. I scrolled down rapidly, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon and financial terms. I stopped breathing entirely when I reached page 14. It was an application for a home equity line of credit, commonly known as a HELOC, taken out against the total equity of my house. The loan amount listed was absolutely staggering. Someone had borrowed $300,000 against the property I had purchased entirely in cash with my late father's life insurance money. I leaned closer to the screen, my forensic auditor instincts overriding my rising panic. To secure a loan of that massive magnitude against a property solely in my name, the bank would strictly require my explicit consent, my physical presence, and my verified signature. I scrolled frantically to the final page of the legal document where the notarized signatures were formally located. There, right on the dotted line, was my name, Natalie Lawson. I stared at the digital ink, analyzing every curve and stroke of the handwriting. It was not a sloppy imitation or a rushed fake. It was a flawless masterpiece of forgery. The loops of the letters, the exact pressure points, even the slight leftward slant I always used when signing official corporate documents were replicated with terrifying precision. Spencer had spent years watching me sign tax returns and legal forms across the kitchen table. He had clearly practiced my signature until he could reproduce it perfectly enough to fool a careless loan officer and a bribed notary public. My own husband had effectively stolen the roof right over my head. If he defaulted on his massive margin debts, the bank would legally seize the house to cover the HELOC. He had completely weaponized my safe sanctuary against me. I forced myself to stop shaking and take a deep breath. I needed to follow the money right now. In every case of corporate financial fraud I had ever investigated, the most crucial step was always tracking the final disbursement of the stolen funds. I opened the next file on the USB drive, which contained the official wire transfer instructions for the approved credit line. I fully expected to see the money routed directly into Spencer's failing brokerage account to immediately cover his massive market losses. But the routing numbers did not match his offshore shell company at all. The funds had been diverted into a completely different financial institution. I opened my secure banking terminal and ran a deep trace on the receiving account number using my high-level corporate access credentials. The search results populated on my screen a few agonizing seconds later. The $300,000 from the fraudulent loan had been deposited into a newly established private wealth management account. It was specifically structured as a generation-skipping trust fund designed entirely to shield hidden assets from standard tax audits. I read the name of the designated beneficiary of the trust. It was registered to the unborn son of Vanessa and David. Spencer had stolen the equity from my home for my own daughter's future inheritance to secretly fund a multi-million-dollar trust for his sister's golden child. But that was not the final twist that made my blood run completely cold. I looked closely at the specific line detailing the sole administrator of the secret trust fund, the person who had total control over the stolen $300,000, the person who had actually orchestrated the entire fraudulent scheme from the very beginning, was not Spencer. The sole legal administrator of the secret trust fund was his mother, Beatrice. The revelation that Beatrice was the mastermind behind the fraudulent trust fund did not make me scream. It did not make me cry or throw things against the wall the way Spencer had. Instead, it triggered a profound, chilling clarity deep within my mind. For years, I had watched my mother-in-law parade around Chicago high society, judging everyone else for their perceived lack of class. Now I had undeniable proof that her entire empire of arrogance was built on a foundation of felony wire fraud and stolen equity. I closed my eyes, taking one final deep breath as a betrayed wife. When I opened them again, I was no longer just Natalie. I was a senior financial investigator building the most important criminal case of my entire career. I detached my emotions from the situation and let my professional training take over. I opened a secure database on my laptop and began systematically compiling the digital footprint of their crimes. Criminals always think they are clever, but they always leave a digital trail. I started with the home equity line of credit application. I bypassed the standard banking portal and accessed the back-end security logs tracking the exact IP addresses and timestamps used to submit the forged documents. The data told a flawless, undeniable story. The initial application had been filled out on a Tuesday afternoon, originating from the exact IP address of Spencer's downtown office. But the final digital signature, the forged version of my name, had been submitted late at night from our own home network. I cross-referenced the device identification numbers. It was Spencer's personal laptop. He had sat in the very room I was sitting in right now, forging my signature while I was asleep down the hall. Next, I traced the creation of the secret trust fund. The digital timestamps for that account originated from a completely different network. I ran a quick geolocation trace on the IP address. It belonged to the private wireless network at Beatrice's luxury condominium. They had worked together perfectly. Spencer committed the physical forgery and secured the loan while Beatrice set up the receiving accounts to launder the stolen equity. It was a textbook conspiracy to commit bank fraud. I organized everything into a massive, heavily encrypted digital dossier. I included the appraisal documents David had provided, the routing numbers, the synthetic social security profiles Spencer had purchased on the dark web, and the forged signature logs. I was just finishing the final summary report when my smartphone screen lit up on the desk. It was a text message from Spencer. It was a massive block of text, carefully crafted to manipulate my reality. I picked up the phone and read his words. Natalie, I am so sorry I lost my temper earlier. I am just under an incredible amount of stress at the firm trying to provide the best life possible for you and our baby. You know I would never do anything to actually hurt you. I think your pregnancy hormones are making you incredibly paranoid and hypersensitive right now. You are blowing a simple financial misunderstanding completely out of proportion. We need to be a united family. Please just calm down, take a nap, and we can talk about this rationally when I get home. I love you so much. I stared at the glowing screen, reading the textbook Gaslighting. He was actively trying to convince me that uncovering federal identity theft and a forged mortgage was just a symptom of pregnancy hormones. He wanted me to doubt my own sanity so he could buy enough time to cover his tracks or force me into compliance. A few hours ago, a message like that might have broken my heart. Now it just gave me the absolute confirmation that my husband was a sociopath who felt zero genuine remorse. I did not type out a long, angry paragraph exposing everything I knew. I did not threaten him or demand an immediate divorce. Arguing with a cornered narcissist only gives them ammunition and forewarning. Instead, I needed him to feel completely safe. I needed him to walk blindly into the trap I was currently setting. I turned my attention back to my laptop and opened the secure web portal for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I navigated directly to the White-Collar Crime Division and attached my encrypted dossier to the official fraud reporting form. I filled in my contact information and typed out a brief professional summary of the attached evidence implicating Spencer and Beatrice. I picked up my smartphone with my left hand and hovered my right hand over my computer mouse. I typed exactly 3 words in response to Spencer's massive manipulative text message: "I forgive you." With a perfectly steady hand, I pressed send on the text message while simultaneously clicking the submit button on the federal fraud report. The trap was set and the countdown to their total destruction had officially begun. The weekend passed with an artificial peace. Spencer returned home late Saturday, treating my text message as a victory. He believed his gaslighting had worked and that I surrendered. He spent Sunday watching golf while I remained locked inside my office securing the final pieces of my legal defense. When Monday morning arrived, I dressed in my sharpest charcoal maternity suit. I left the house before he even woke up, taking the train into downtown Chicago. My office on the 42nd floor of a gleaming skyscraper was my sanctuary. It was an environment governed entirely by pure logic and undeniable facts. I poured a cup of coffee, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound control. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had officially confirmed receipt of my fraud dossier, and my attorney was drafting an emergency asset freeze. All I had to do was maintain my professional composure and let the legal system close its jaws around my husband and his mother. But Beatrice was never one to wait patiently. She operated on a chaotic timeline dictated entirely by her own arrogance and rising panic over the delayed wire transfer. At exactly 10:15, the serene quiet of the executive auditing floor was abruptly shattered. I was reviewing a quarterly compliance report when I heard an unnatural commotion echoing down the marble hallway. It was the sharp, shrill sound of a woman crying hysterically. I stood up slowly and walked toward the thick glass walls of my office. My stomach tightened into a freezing knot as I instantly recognized the piercing pitch of those voices. I stepped out of my private office and moved quietly toward the reception atrium. There, standing right in the center of the pristine lobby, making an absolute humiliating spectacle of themselves, were Beatrice and Vanessa. They had somehow bypassed the strict building security protocols and rode the elevator straight up to my private floor. Beatrice was wearing a somber designer dress, clutching a crumpled handkerchief to her chest. Vanessa stood beside her, rubbing her pregnant belly and weeping loudly into her manicured hands. They looked like grieving widows straight out of a cheap soap opera. Our head receptionist looked completely overwhelmed, trying desperately to calm them down, but Beatrice was intentionally escalating the situation to ensure maximum visibility. "We need to speak to whoever is in charge of human resources immediately," Beatrice demanded, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. The loud demand echoed sharply, drawing the immediate undivided attention of several senior firm partners who stepped out of their private offices to watch the theatrical scene unfold. My daughter-in-law, Natalie Lawson, works on this floor. She is having a severe psychotic break. She is locking my son out of his own savings and acting incredibly dangerous. We are terrified for her safety and the safety of her unborn child. Vanessa chimed in perfectly on cue, letting out a dramatic, breathless sob. She is suffering from severe pregnancy-induced paranoia. Vanessa cried out, turning toward the growing crowd of corporate spectators. She spent the entire weekend destroying expensive property in her home and raving about wild financial conspiracies that do not even exist. My brother is absolutely heartbroken and terrified to sleep in his own house. "We just do not know what else to do. We need her employer to intervene before she bankrupts her family. I stood frozen near the hallway corner, listening to their calculated, malicious lies. It was a textbook corporate ambush, specifically designed to destroy me in my professional sanctuary. They knew my lucrative career in forensic auditing relied heavily on my unshakable reputation for mental stability and flawless ethical judgment. By publicly accusing me of financial abuse, they were desperately trying to force my firm to place me on immediate administrative leave. Without my corporate income and vast professional resources, I would be completely defenseless. Before I could step forward to quickly shut down their completely pathetic performance, the heavy oak doors of the Human Resources Department swung wide open. Gregory, our Senior Director of Employee Relations, stepped out into the chaotic lobby. He was an imposing, incredibly stern man who did not tolerate office drama. He stood there quietly, as Beatrice rushed forward to whisper another tearful, frantic lie directly into his ear. His expression darkened immediately, shifting from mild annoyance to deep, severe professional concern. Gregory held up a hand, silencing Beatrice instantly. He signaled to our receptionist to clear the lobby of all unnecessary personnel. He then looked directly down the long corridor and locked eyes firmly with me. He did not smile. He did not offer a reassuring nod. He simply pointed a rigid finger toward the heavy glass doors of the main executive conference room and gestured silently for me to immediately follow him inside. I followed Gregory into the expansive glass-walled executive conference room. Beatrice and Vanessa were right behind me, their expensive heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. Gregory closed the heavy soundproof doors, plunging the room into total silence, cutting off the whispers of my coworkers outside. He took his seat at the head of the long mahogany table, folding his hands firmly together. He did not invite anyone else to sit. Beatrice immediately launched into her prepared monologue. She stood at the opposite end of the table, gripping the edge with white knuckles. "Mr. Gregory, we are so incredibly sorry to disrupt your corporate environment," Beatrice said, her voice trembling with perfectly calibrated fake distress. "But my son Spencer is in absolute agony. Natalie has completely lost her grip on reality. She has locked all their financial accounts and is suffering from dangerous delusions. We consulted with our family attorneys this morning, and they advised us to intervene immediately before she does irreparable damage to her own lucrative career and her unborn child." Vanessa reached into her designer leather tote bag and pulled out a thick stack of crisp legal documents. She slid them across the mahogany table, directly toward me. "It is a comprehensive financial power of attorney," Vanessa said, sniffing softly, wiping away a non-existent tear. "It transfers temporary control of all your assets to Spencer. It is purely for your own protection, Natalie, until you can get the intensive psychiatric help you so clearly need. If you sign it right now, we can all leave quietly, and you can take an extended medical leave of absence from the firm without causing any more public embarrassment." Gregory looked at the thick stack of documents and then looked directly at me. His expression was completely unreadable. As the Senior Director of Human Resources, his only priority was protecting the firm from massive liability. Beatrice was betting everything on the assumption that I would break down in tears or start screaming, thus validating her fabricated claims of my mental instability in front of my superiors. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I simply picked up the power of attorney document, glanced briefly at the first page, and pushed it aside with complete indifference. Gregory first said, maintaining a perfectly level professional tone, "I apologize for the unprecedented disruption to the executive floor today. However, I am not experiencing a mental breakdown. I am currently the victim of a highly coordinated financial crime, and the two women standing in this room are active co-conspirators trying to cover their tracks." Beatrice let out a loud, dramatic gasp of mock horror. "Listen to her, Mr. Gregory, she is completely delusional." I ignored her entirely. I reached into my tailored blazer pocket, pulled out my secure flash drive, and walked over to the podium at the front of the room. I plugged it into the presentation system and lowered the massive projector screen. "May I use the display?" I asked Gregory. He gave a single tight nod. I brought up the first document on the bright screen. It was the forged home equity line of credit application. This is a $300,000 loan taken out against a property I own solely in my name. I explained, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. The signature at the bottom is a masterclass forgery executed by my husband Spencer. I switched to the next slide, projecting the detailed IP tracking logs. And these are the back-end security logs proving the fraudulent application was finalized from my husband's personal laptop inside our shared home. Vanessa's fake tears stopped instantly. She stared up at the screen, her mouth hanging slightly open. Beatrice stood completely frozen, her face draining of all color as she realized what I was showing them. I clicked to the final slide showing the wire transfer routing numbers and the official registration of the Generation Skipping Trust Fund. The stolen funds were not used for a medical emergency. I continued speaking directly to Gregory. They were laundered into a secret trust fund administered entirely by Beatrice. I have submitted this complete forensic dossier to the Federal Bureau of Investigation White Collar Crime Division. I locked my personal accounts to prevent further theft. As a senior auditor at this firm, my strict ethical obligation is to immediately report and document fraud. That is exactly what I have done. The silence in the conference room was heavy. Gregory adjusted his glasses and looked from the projected federal fraud report directly to Beatrice. His polite corporate demeanor shifted instantly to cold institutional hostility. Mom, Gregory said, his voice like cracking ice. You have entered a secure corporate facility to actively harass one of my senior executives under completely false pretenses while currently under an active federal investigation. I suggest you take your fraudulent documents and leave this building immediately before I have our security team escort you out in handcuffs. Beatrice realized her brilliant corporate ambush had spectacularly backfired. The sophisticated, wealthy matriarch facade dissolved completely, revealing the desperate, cornered woman underneath. She snatched the unsigned power of attorney off the table, her hands shaking violently. She marched toward the heavy glass doors, dragging a completely stunned Vanessa right behind her. "You think you are so incredibly smart?" Beatrice hissed, turning back to glare at me with pure, unadulterated venom. "Enjoy your little slide presentation, Natalie, because by Friday you are going to lose absolutely everything." She shoved the heavy doors open and disappeared down the hallway, leaving the ominous threat hanging heavily in the cold air. The rest of the long week following the disastrous corporate ambush passed in a state of tense, unnatural quiet. Gregory, our human resources director, had officially placed me on a fully paid administrative leave. It was not a punishment but a strict protective measure for both me and the firm while my federal fraud report was being processed. I spent Wednesday and Thursday entirely inside my house, double-checking my home security systems and finalizing my legal strategy. Beatrice had promised I would lose absolutely everything by Friday. When Friday morning finally arrived, I woke up incredibly early, fully expecting a massive hurricane. I brewed a cup of decaf coffee and sat by the large front window, watching the quiet suburban street. At exactly 9 in the morning, an unmarked black sedan pulled into my driveway. A tall, stern man wearing a plain gray suit stepped out holding a thick manila folder. I knew exactly what his job was before he even reached the porch. I opened the front door calmly. "Are you Natalie Lawson?" he asked, looking directly at me. I gave a single nod. He handed me the heavy folder, stated flatly that I had been formally served with legal papers, and walked back to his vehicle. I carried the thick folder to my kitchen island and broke the legal seal. They were emergency divorce filings initiated by Spencer. But it was not just a standard petition for the dissolution of our marriage. Pinned to the very front was an ex parte motion for immediate full custody of our unborn daughter. I read through the incredibly aggressive legal jargon, feeling my blood run completely cold, despite all of my previous careful preparation. Spencer's high-priced attorney had painted a truly horrifying and entirely fabricated picture of me. The petition claimed I was currently suffering from severe prenatal psychosis. It falsely stated that I had violently locked him out of his own home, maliciously restricted his access to his own money, and threatened to flee the state to hide the baby from him. They even used the incident at my office, twisting the narrative to claim I had publicly hallucinated a wild financial conspiracy in front of my corporate superiors. It was a brutal, preemptive strike. Spencer was trying to legally weaponize the family court system to permanently strip me of my maternal rights before the federal investigators could completely finalize their criminal case against his offshore accounts. I immediately grabbed my heavy winter coat and the thick documents, quickly driving straight through the morning traffic to the downtown offices of my attorney Jonathan. He was a famously ruthless and highly experienced family law practitioner who specialized exclusively in high-net-worth divorces and complex financial concealment. I walked directly past his secretary into his corner office and dropped the massive stack of emergency papers heavily onto his polished glass desk. "Spencer is actively trying to take the baby," I said, my voice finally trembling slightly for the very first time all week. "He is formally requesting an immediate emergency hearing to definitively declare me mentally unfit to be a mother." Jonathan did not immediately respond to my panic. He carefully picked up the thick stack of papers and spent the next solid hour meticulously reading through the entire emergency motion in absolute complete silence. I sat incredibly nervously in the plush leather chair across from him, quietly watching his eyes scan the pages, anxiously waiting for him to tell me exactly how bad this current situation was really going to be. Instead of looking deeply concerned, Jonathan simply leaned back in his expensive leather chair and let out a very low, sharp, confident laugh. He really did not look worried at all. He flipped to the very back of the thick petition and pulled out the mandatory financial disclosure forms Spencer was legally required to submit to the family court to prove he had the financial means to be a single father. Jonathan slid the document across the glass desk, tapping a specific line item with his expensive gold pen. "Spencer just made the most spectacular mistake of his entire life," Jonathan said, a wide, predatory smile spreading across his face. "When people file for emergency custody, they have to prove financial stability under penalty of perjury. Look right here at what your brilliant husband listed to prove he can support a child." I leaned forward and read the financial declaration. Under the section titled Personal Liquid Assets, Spencer had proudly listed a specific account containing exactly $300,000. He had officially claimed the stolen funds from the forged home equity line of credit as his own clean money. He just voluntarily submitted a legally binding signed written confession directly to a sitting family court judge. Jonathan quickly made copies of the incredibly damning financial declaration and immediately filed a formal counter-motion citing the exact federal fraud statutes Spencer had just confessed to violating. He assured me the emergency custody request would be completely dead on arrival at the upcoming hearing. But while I was successfully winning the silent legal battle in the sterile environment of the courthouse, Spencer and his family decided to escalate the war into the very public and highly volatile arena of social media. By Saturday morning, my smartphone was practically melting from the sheer volume of incoming notifications. I made the mistake of opening an aggressive direct message from a cousin I had not spoken to in 3 years. Attached to the hateful message was a link to a video Vanessa had posted on her public social media accounts late Friday night. I clicked the link and watched the performance of a lifetime. Vanessa was sitting in what looked like a modestly furnished nursery, holding up a tiny pair of blue baby shoes. She was not wearing her usual expensive designer clothes. Instead, she opted for a plain, oversized sweater that made her look small and incredibly vulnerable. She stared directly into the camera, tears streaming flawlessly down her perfectly contoured face. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," she began, her voice quivering with expertly manufactured emotion. "But my family is under attack from someone we trusted. My sister-in-law is going through a terrible mental health crisis, and she is taking it out on my brother. She has maliciously frozen all their bank accounts, leaving him completely destitute. Now she is trying to bankrupt our entire family to stop us from welcoming my new baby boy. She even stormed into my baby shower and caused a terrifying scene. We are so scared for my brother and my unborn niece. Please send prayers. The video had already amassed tens of thousands of views and thousands of comments within hours. The entire extended family and Spencer's vast network of wealthy clients were sharing it, expressing deep outrage and pledging their support. My phone buzzed relentlessly with incoming texts, calling me a monster, a gold digger, and a psychopath. The smear campaign was a highly calculated move orchestrated by Beatrice to destroy my social standing and paint me as the villain before the federal investigation became public knowledge. The urge to immediately log onto my own accounts and post the forged loan documents was absolutely overwhelming. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to publicly expose Spencer's massive gambling debts and Beatrice's secret offshore trust fund. I typed out 3 different explosive responses, my fingers shaking with raw anger. But before I hit publish, I remembered Jonathan's strict advice from his office the day before. Do not say a single word, Jonathan had warned me, looking completely serious. Let them dig the hole as deep as possible. Every time they publicly lie, they are just building our defamation case and providing the federal prosecutors with more evidence of a coordinated conspiracy. Silence is the most terrifying response you can give to a narcissist because it proves you are not playing their game. I deleted the angry drafts and took a deep breath. I went into my phone settings and completely disabled all notifications from every social media platform. I blocked the numbers of the aggressive family members and placed my phone face down on the kitchen island. Let them talk, I thought to myself. They were celebrating a temporary victory on the internet while I was actively building a federal indictment in the real world. The weekend dragged on with agonizing slowness. I focused entirely on resting and protecting my health, trying to shield my unborn daughter from the massive stress response coursing through my body. The house felt incredibly large and empty without Spencer there, but it also felt completely safe for the first time in years. On Sunday evening, right as the sun was beginning to set over the frozen Chicago skyline, the sudden jarring ring of a phone broke the heavy silence. I glanced at my smartphone, but the screen was completely dark. The ringing was coming from my heavy winter coat hanging in the hallway. I walked over and pulled a cheap prepaid burner phone from the deep pocket. I had purchased it on Friday, paying in cash, just in case Spencer tried to monitor my primary line through our shared cellular plan. I had only given the number to 2 people, my lawyer, Jonathan, and David. I flipped the small phone open and held it to my ear. "Hello," I said quietly. "Natalie, it is David." His voice was hushed and completely urgent, sounding like he was standing outside in the freezing wind. "I am at a payphone near my office. Vanessa confiscated my smartphone because she thought I was secretly talking to you. You need to listen to me very carefully right now. They are accelerating the timeline." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a sudden spike of adrenaline. "The custody hearing is not until next month." "They are not waiting for the courts," David said, speaking incredibly fast. "Spencer's broker gave him a final deadline for the margin call, and the feds must have frozen Beatrice's new trust account because they cannot access the stolen house money. They are panicking, Natalie. You need to know about the gala." I gripped the small plastic phone tightly, pressing it hard against my ear. "What gala, David?" I asked, my voice dropping into a harsh whisper. "I have not heard anything about a gala." David let out a harsh, bitter breath. "Of course you have not. Beatrice has been planning it in absolute secrecy for the past 3 weeks. She rented out the grand ballroom at the Oak Brook Country Club for this coming Saturday night. They are inviting the entire extended family, every single local politician Beatrice plays tennis with, and most importantly, all of Spencer's wealthiest investment clients. It is supposed to be a massive society event. Why I demanded. They do not have the cash flow to rent a country club right now. That is the entire point, Natalie," David explained, sounding completely exhausted. "Beatrice is using the event to publicly announce the creation of a massive legacy fund. She is going to stand up on a stage in front of the entire Chicago elite and present Vanessa with a legal document establishing a $2 million generation skipping trust for our unborn son. I froze completely. The numbers slammed into my forensic auditor brain and instantly shattered. $2 million. That is mathematically impossible, I said, pacing across the hardwood floor of the hallway. David, the fraudulent home equity line of credit they took out against my house was only for $300,000. Even if they used every single penny of that stolen equity to seed the trust, they are still short $1.7 million. Spencer does not have that kind of capital. His trading accounts are completely underwater, and Beatrice leases half of her designer jewelry. Where exactly is the rest of the money coming from? David hesitated for a fraction of a second. I broke into Spencer's home office yesterday while he was at court fighting your lawyer. David confessed, his voice dropping even lower. I found printed transfer ledgers hidden in the bottom drawer of his desk. Natalie, he is moving massive amounts of money out of his older clients' retirement portfolios. He is funneling it through the shell company he set up in Delaware. The air rushed completely out of my lungs as the horrifying reality of the situation finally clicked into place. It was not just a case of simple bank fraud or an impulsive gambling addiction anymore. My husband was actively running a massive Ponzi scheme. He is using my house equity to cover his immediate margin calls to keep the brokers off his back, I said, my mind working at lightning speed. And he is stealing his clients' retirement funds to build this fake $2 million trust. He wants to make a massive public spectacle of his wealth at the gala to convince everyone he is a financial genius. He needs to attract new investors on Saturday night so he can use their new money to secretly backfill the retirement accounts he just robbed. Exactly, David said. But Natalie, if he actually signs those trust documents on stage at the gala and formally transfers the stolen client funds into Beatrice's offshore accounts, the money will be untraceable. By the time the markets open on Monday morning, his older clients will be entirely wiped out. They will lose their life savings. And my house, I realized, feeling a sickening knot twist in my stomach. The initial $300,000 loan was the foundation of the entire laundering sequence. If the federal authorities uncover a Ponzi scheme after the money is already gone, they will legally seize every single asset tied to the fraud to pay back the victims. They will take my house, David. I will be completely homeless with a newborn baby. We cannot wait for the federal investigators to process your fraud report, David urged. Government bureaucracy moves way too slowly. By the time an agent looks at your file next week, the gala will be over and the money will be gone. You need to do something right now. I stood in the dark hallway, looking at the beautiful home I had purchased with my father's life insurance money. I thought about the nursery I was building upstairs. I thought about the hundreds of innocent elderly clients who trusted Spencer with their entire futures. Beatrice and Spencer thought they had completely boxed me out. They thought their smear campaign had terrified me into absolute submission. Are you going to the gala? I asked, my voice suddenly dropping into a zone of absolute freezing calm. Yes, David replied quietly. Vanessa is making me wear a rented tuxedo to play the part of the grateful husband. I have to be there. Good, I said, taking a slow, deliberate breath. I need you to help me right now. I told David to act normally and find a way to get the guest list before Saturday. I hung up the phone and stood in the dark hallway. Federal authorities were building their case, but white-collar investigations take weeks to result in arrests. By then, Spencer would have completely drained his clients' retirement funds, and the bank would seize my home. I needed to force the issue and detonate this entire situation on Saturday night in front of the very people he was actively stealing from. But to do that, I needed guaranteed access to a private, heavily guarded country club gala, where I was strictly forbidden. I needed a golden ticket, and there was only one person arrogant enough to give it to me. I walked into the kitchen and drank a glass of ice water slowly. I needed to execute a high-risk psychological play that required absolute perfection. I needed Spencer to believe his brutal smear campaign and his emergency custody filing had completely broken my entire spirit. I grabbed my phone and stared at his name. I took 3 deep breaths, intentionally hyperventilating, just enough to make my chest heave and my voice grow incredibly strained. I thought about the sheer cruelty of his actions, stealing from his own unborn daughter to fund his sister's lavish lifestyle. Real tears of intense, overwhelming frustration welled up in my eyes. I let them fall, allowing my nose to stuff up. I hit the green call button and waited. He answered on the 4th ring. "What do you want, Natalie?" he answered, his voice dripping with condescension and cold annoyance. "Spencer." I breathed out, letting my voice crack perfectly. I sounded small, defeated, and utterly exhausted. "Please, I cannot do this anymore." There was a brief pause on the line. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background, meaning he was likely lounging in a luxury hotel suite paid for with stolen money. "What exactly can you not do anymore, Natalie?" he asked, his tone shifting from annoyance to a sickening kind of triumphant curiosity. "Any of it," I sobbed, allowing a genuine-sounding hiccup to escape my throat. "The legal papers, the horrific videos Vanessa is posting, the messages from your family. Spencer, please, I am begging you. Do not take my baby away from me. I am so tired and I am so scared. You win. You were entirely right about absolutely everything, and I was just being crazy." A low, dark chuckle echoed through the phone speaker. It was the sound of a narcissist realizing he had completely crushed his victim. "I told you your pregnancy hormones were making you hysterical," he said smoothly, his arrogance practically radiating through the cellular connection. "You brought this entirely on yourself by disrespecting my mother and trying to control my finances. I am simply doing what is absolutely necessary to protect my child from an unstable environment." I know I cried, forcing my voice to tremble violently. "I will do whatever you want, Spencer. Just please call your lawyer and drop the emergency custody hearing. I will sign the house over to you completely. You can have the equity, you can have the entire property. Just let me keep my daughter." He was silent for a long moment, clearly calculating his total victory. He had successfully forged my signature, stolen $300,000, and now he was getting the victim to legally hand over the deed to cover his tracks permanently. "I will drop the custody motion," he finally said, his voice dripping with absolute authority. "But simply signing the house over in private is not going to fix the massive public damage you did to my family. My mother is hosting a highly exclusive gala this Saturday night at the Oak Brook Country Club to announce Vanessa's new trust fund." I held my breath, waiting for the trap to spring perfectly. "If you want me to call off my lawyers, you are going to bring the signed property transfer deed directly to the gala," Spencer demanded coldly. "You are going to walk up to my mother in front of all of our friends and clients, and you are going to hand her the deed as a formal public apology for your absolutely psychotic behavior. If you do that, I might consider letting you back into our lives. Do you understand me?" "I understand, Spencer," I whispered quietly, staring at my reflection in the dark kitchen window pane. A cold, completely lethal smile spread across my face as I listened to him breathe. "I am going to give you and your awful mother exactly what you both truly deserve. I will see you on Saturday night. I will most definitely be right there." Saturday morning arrived with a bitter frost that coated the windows of my house in a thick layer of ice. While the rest of the city slept, I was already wide awake inside my home office, listening to the rhythmic, mechanical hum of my heavy-duty laser printer. Page after page of undeniable financial ruins spilled into the output tray. I was systematically printing the entire unredacted dossier of Spencer's massive Ponzi scheme. Every bank transfer, every fake social security number, every forged signature, and every stolen retirement account ledger was reduced to stark black ink on crisp white paper. To ensure there could be absolutely no confusion, I took a heavy red ink stamp and pressed it firmly onto the top right corner of every single title page, marking them as official federal evidence. Across town, Beatrice was holding court inside an exclusive luxury salon in the Gold Coast district. I could easily picture her sitting in a plush velvet chair sipping a complimentary glass of imported champagne while a team of stylists fussed over her hair and makeup. She had undoubtedly spent the entire morning gloating to her manicurist about how she had successfully broken her stubborn daughter-in-law. She was likely bragging about the grand society event she was hosting that very evening, telling anyone who would listen about the massive legacy fund she was establishing for her new grandson. Beatrice thrived on the illusion of supreme control. She fully believed that tonight would be her ultimate crowning achievement, where she would publicly force me to hand over the deed to my house and cement her family status among the Chicago elite. She had absolutely no idea that her pristine reputation was about to be burned to the ground. I pulled the final stack of documents from the printer and neatly aligned the edges. I organized the files into separate color-coded folders. The blue folders contained the proof of Spencer's forged home equity line of credit. The yellow folders held the dark web receipts for my unborn daughter's stolen identity. But the thickest folder by far was the heavy black one. That folder contained the complete financial autopsy of his investment firm, showing exactly how he had systematically drained the life savings of his oldest, most vulnerable clients to fund Beatrice's fake trust account. I slid the heavy folders into my structured designer leather briefcase, feeling the satisfying weight of absolute justice. My secure burner phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. I picked it up and answered immediately. It was David calling from inside the Oak Brook Country Club. "I am standing in the main ballroom right now," David whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the massive empty space. "The event staff is setting up the floral arrangements and the caterers are bringing in the tables." Beatrice went completely overboard, Natalie. "There are at least 200 chairs set up out here. Every single one of Spencer's high-net-worth clients has an assigned seat right near the front." "Is the head table elevated?" I asked, running a critical eye over my final checklist. "Yes, it is on a raised platform at the far end of the room," David confirmed. "Beatrice, Spencer, Vanessa, and I are all seated up there. There is a wooden podium with a microphone set up for Beatrice to make her grand speech and announce the trust fund. I need you to do exactly what we discussed last night," I told him, my voice steady and commanding. "Can you get access to the audio-visual controls?" David let out a tense breath. "I already did. I tipped the sound technician $100 to let me check the microphone levels. I synced a secondary wireless lavalier microphone to the main house speakers and taped it directly under the rim of the podium. Whatever is said near that head table tonight is going to be broadcast through the entire ballroom sound system. I also overrode the master volume lock. Spencer will not be able to simply turn off the sound when he panics." "Perfect," I replied. "Stay out of their way and wait for my signal. I will see you tonight." I hung up the phone and walked upstairs to my bedroom. I opened my large walk-in closet and bypassed the muted conservative maternity dresses I usually wore to corporate events. Spencer and Beatrice expected me to arrive looking broken, defeated, and thoroughly humiliated. They expected me to shrink into the shadows. I reached to the very back of the closet and pulled out a custom-tailored floor-length maternity gown. It was a stunning architectural masterpiece of heavy silk, and it was the exact color of fresh blood. I slipped the vivid red dress over my head, smoothing the luxurious fabric over my pregnant belly. I applied a bold crimson lipstick, staring at my reflection in the full-length mirror. I did not look like a victim. I looked like an executioner. I grabbed my car keys, picked up the heavy briefcase filled with federal evidence, and walked out the front door into the freezing night. The guillotine was fully assembled. It was time to let the blade fall. The evening drive to the country club took exactly 45 minutes. I handed my keys to the valet, stepping out into the freezing night air. The grand entrance was illuminated by massive crystal chandeliers, casting a warm, golden glow over the polished marble floors. I adjusted the heavy strap of my leather briefcase, feeling the solid weight of the federal evidence resting against my hip. My heart beat in a slow, steady rhythm. I was no longer the frightened, pregnant woman Spencer thought he had broken. I was the architect of his absolute ruin. I walked past the coat check and approached the heavy mahogany doors of the main ballroom. Two event coordinators stood by the entrance holding gold clipboards. They barely glanced at me as I pushed past them, pushing the heavy doors open with my free hand. The sheer scale of Beatrice's arrogance hit me like a physical blow. The ballroom had been completely transformed into a sea of pastel blue and shimmering silver. Thousands of pale blue roses cascaded from the ceiling. The tables were draped in expensive silver silk. The lighting was tuned to a soft icy blue meant to highlight the winter wonderland aesthetic Beatrice had demanded for her new grandson. And then there was me, standing right in the main doorway wrapped in a custom-tailored floor-length maternity gown, the exact vivid color of fresh blood. My entrance was a massive visual disruption to the entire carefully curated aesthetic. I was a glaring red siren in a room designed for quiet obedience. The gentle hum of classical music played by a live string quartet seemed to falter for just a fraction of a second. Conversations at the tables nearest to the door abruptly stopped. Heads turned. I felt the heavy collective weight of 200 pairs of eyes locking onto me. I recognized the faces of Spencer's extended family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had spent the last 3 days leaving hateful voicemails on my phone now stared at me with open disgust and utter confusion. They whispered behind their hands, glaring at my completely inappropriate dress. I took one step forward onto the plush carpet. Immediately, a large man in a dark suit stepped directly into my path. He was private security hired specifically for the event. He held his hand up flat, signaling me to stop. "Excuse me, Mom," he said, his voice polite but incredibly firm. "I am going to have to ask for your name. You do not appear to be on the approved guest list for the head table tonight." I did not back away. I looked right past his broad shoulders, scanning the enormous room until my eyes found the raised platform at the far end. The head table was draped in white silk and covered in silver candles. Spencer was sitting there wearing a custom tuxedo, holding a glass of scotch. He looked up and saw the commotion at the door. He saw me standing there in the bright red dress. For a moment, I saw a flash of genuine anger cross his face at my blatant disregard for the blue color scheme. But then his eyes dropped to the heavy leather briefcase securely clutched in my right hand. The arrogant, triumphant smirk returned to his face. He fully believed that briefcase contained the signed deed to my house. He thought I was showing up to surrender my entire life to him in front of his wealthiest clients. He wanted this public humiliation. Spencer stood up from the head table and waved his hand dismissively toward the security guard. "It is fine, let her through." Spencer called out, his voice carrying over the quiet whispers of the crowd. "She is my wife. She has a very special apology to deliver to the family tonight." The security guard hesitated for a second before stepping aside and lowering his hand. I did not thank him. I tightened my grip on the briefcase and began the long walk down the center aisle of the ballroom. The whispers grew louder as I passed the tables filled with wealthy investors and local politicians. I kept my head high, my posture perfect. I completely ignored the angry extended family members. My gaze was locked on the elevated stage. As I approached the bottom of the short staircase leading up to the head table, a figure stepped out from the shadows and entirely blocked my path. It was Beatrice. She wore a stunning, sparkling silver evening gown, holding a crystal flute filled with expensive champagne. Her posture was rigidly perfect, but her eyes were filled with pure, unadulterated venom. She looked at my red dress and then at my face, preparing to verbally eviscerate me in front of the entire Chicago elite. Beatrice stepped directly into my path, her silver gown shimmering under the icy blue lights of the ballroom. She held her crystal flute of champagne delicately, but the knuckles of her other hand were white with tension. She leaned in close so the guests at the nearest tables could not hear her words. The heavy scent of her expensive perfume was almost suffocating. "I always knew you lacked basic social grace, Natalie," she whispered, her voice dripping with pure venom. "But showing up to my grandson's celebration dressed like a cheap scarlet woman is a new low even for you. I suppose we can never truly expect new money to learn its proper place in society. You can buy all the expensive houses you want, but you will always be that pathetic little accountant who had to beg for a seat at our table." I did not flinch. I did not drop my gaze. I stood perfectly still, letting her pour her toxic arrogance over me. She fully expected me to look down in shame or perhaps cry and run back out the door. Instead, I offered her a slow, chilling smile. "It is funny you should mention buying things, Beatrice," I replied, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of fear. I reached out and gently tapped the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. "Because I happen to know exactly how much it costs to rent this particular piece from the jewelers on Oak Street. $2,000 for the weekend, isn't it? It is a beautiful necklace, Beatrice. It is just a shame you will have to return it on Monday morning before the late fees kick in." Beatrice froze entirely. The smug, triumphant expression vanished from her face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. She took a tiny step backward, her hand instinctively flying up to cover the least diamonds at her throat. I had just effortlessly pierced the very core of her entire identity. I had used my forensic audit skills to trace her vanity expenses, proving that her grand societal image was nothing more than a carefully constructed, deeply expensive mirage. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice suddenly shaking with genuine outrage and panic. "You know absolutely nothing." "I know exactly how much debt this family is swimming in, Beatrice," I said, leaning slightly closer. "I know about the margin calls. I know about the offshore accounts. And I know exactly why you need this massive gala tonight. You are not celebrating a grandson, Beatrice. You are desperately trying to recruit new marks for a failing grift." Before she could respond, the heavy sound of footsteps echoed on the wooden stairs behind her. Spencer descended from the raised platform, his face a mask of poorly concealed fury. He completely ignored his mother grabbing my upper arm with a painful, bruising grip. He did not care about the stares from the crowd. He only cared about saving his own skin. "Do you have the deed?" he demanded, his voice low and threatening. He yanked me roughly toward the side of the stage, away from Beatrice, who was still staring at me in horrified silence. "Stop playing games, Natalie. Give me the signed paperwork right now, or I swear I will make sure you never see our daughter again. The lawyer is standing right over there, waiting to notarize the transfer." I looked at the heavy leather briefcase in my right hand. I tightened my grip on the handle, feeling the weight of the federal evidence inside. I looked back up at my husband, staring into the eyes of the man who had completely destroyed our family for a few months of fake wealth. "I have exactly what you need right here, Spencer," I whispered, my voice completely steady. "Let go of my arm and I will give it to you." Spencer finally released his bruising grip on my arm, but immediately placed his hand firmly against the small of my back. He shoved me forward, guiding me away from the crowded ballroom and down a short, dimly lit corridor. We reached a heavy oak door marked Private Lounge. He pushed it open and forced me inside, kicking the door shut behind us with his heel. The heavy click of the brass lock turning echoed loudly in the small, confined space. The room was a small staging area for the country club staff, filled with stacked chairs and extra linens. It was completely silent, cutting off the soft classical music from the main event. Spencer turned to face me, his physical presence suddenly overwhelmingly oppressive. He took a step forward, intentionally backing me up against a stack of folded tables. He reached into the inner pocket of his custom tuxedo jacket and pulled out a crisp, folded document. He slapped it down hard on a nearby table. "That is the revised custody agreement," he said, his voice echoing with cold, absolute authority. "I had my lawyers draft it this afternoon. It explicitly states that I am dropping the emergency motion and granting you primary physical custody of our daughter. But I am not signing the bottom line until I see the transferred property deed in your hands right now." I kept my head slightly lowered, maintaining the carefully constructed illusion of a thoroughly broken woman. I slowly opened the clasp of my designer briefcase. As my hand slipped inside, I did not reach for the heavy folders of federal evidence. Instead, my fingers brushed against my smartphone. Without breaking eye contact with my husband, I subtly pressed the side button and blindly swiped the screen to activate the voice recording application. I left the phone sitting right at the top of the open briefcase, its microphone perfectly exposed to capture every single word spoken in the quiet room. I need to know this is absolutely the end of it, Spencer, I whispered, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound completely desperate. If I give you the house and hand over the deed to your mother tonight, you have to promise to leave me and my baby alone. Spencer let out a harsh, arrogant laugh. He leaned closer, placing his hands on the table on either side of me, effectively trapping me against the furniture. You really have no right to make demands right now, Natalie, he sneered. You forced my hand. If you had just behaved and transferred the hospital deposit when my mother asked, none of this would have happened. You made me file that custody motion to teach you a lesson about respect. I forced a tear to well up in my eye. I just do not understand why any of this was even necessary, I said, keeping my tone submissive and confused. You always told me your investment firm was doing incredibly well. Why did you have to go behind my back? Why did you forge my signature to take out a $300,000 home equity line of credit just to fund your mother's secret trust account for Vanessa? Spencer rolled his eyes, looking at me as if I were incredibly stupid. He could not resist the overwhelming urge to brag about his own perceived brilliance. Because it was a temporary liquidity issue, Natalie, he explained, his voice dripping with condescension. And it was my idea, so you should be thanking me for saving the family image. I needed a massive immediate cash injection to seed the legacy trust for my nephew. If my high net worth clients see my mother publicly managing a $2 million trust, they will feel completely confident in my financial strategies and invest millions more tonight. Forging your signature on the loan application was just a necessary shortcut to get the initial capital I needed to make the entire fund look legitimate. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained perfectly blank. I had it. I had the explicit verbal confession recorded in pristine high-definition audio. He had just admitted to the forgery, the loan, and the fraudulent intent behind the trust fund. I slowly pulled my hand out of the briefcase, holding one of the blank white envelopes I had packed specifically for this moment. I held it tightly against my chest. Just before Spencer could snatch the envelope from my hands, a booming voice echoed through the hidden ceiling speakers in the lounge. It was the ballroom master of ceremonies, announcing that the guests should take their seats for the evening speeches. Spencer stepped back from me, smoothing the lapels of his tuxedo. The arrogant smirk returned to his face as he looked at the envelope in my hands. "Wipe your face and follow me," he commanded, gesturing toward the heavy oak door. "It is time to give Mom her present." Spencer opened the heavy oak door and guided me back out into the main corridor. He kept his hand firmly on the small of my back, a gesture that looked like protective affection to anyone watching, but felt like a physical threat to me. We walked back into the massive ballroom just as the catering staff was clearing the final dessert plates. The low murmur of wealthy guests filled the cavernous space. Spencer led me toward a small reserved table positioned right near the front steps of the raised platform. He pushed me gently into a chair and took his own seat, keeping his eyes locked on the stage. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, leaving only a brilliant white spotlight illuminating the wooden podium at the center of the head table. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone, tapping it lightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice echoing across the silent room. "Please direct your attention to the stage and welcome our gracious host for this evening, the matriarch of the family, Beatrice." The ballroom erupted into polite applause. Beatrice stood up from her seat at the head table. She smoothed the front of her shimmering silver gown and walked toward the podium with the practiced grace of a seasoned politician. She soaked in the applause, offering small, humble smiles to the crowd. But when she reached the microphone and looked out over the sea of faces, her eyes burned with absolute arrogant triumph. She waited for the room to fall completely silent before she finally spoke. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight." Beatrice began, her voice amplified perfectly through the massive sound system. "We are gathered in this beautiful space to celebrate something far more important than mere financial success. We are here to celebrate family. We are here to celebrate legacy. In a world that is constantly changing, there is nothing more vital than preserving the purity of our bloodlines and the strength of our traditions. I sat perfectly still in my chair, keeping my hands folded over the leather briefcase resting on my lap. I listened to her spin a horrifyingly elitist narrative. A true legacy is not simply handed down. Beatrice continued, her tone rising with dramatic flair. It must be carefully cultivated. It requires the right pedigree, the right upbringing, and a steadfast commitment to excellence. I look at my beautiful daughter Vanessa, who is preparing to bring a new life into this world, and I see the absolute perfection of our family values. I look at my son Spencer, who has built a magnificent financial empire through sheer brilliance and unyielding integrity, and I know our future is incredibly secure. Tonight, I am establishing a $2 million generation skipping trust for my new grandson to ensure our dynasty remains unbroken for decades to come. The wealthy investors at the front tables nodded in deep approval, completely blind to the fact that their own stolen retirement funds were currently financing this sickening display of ego. But Beatrice was not finished. She leaned closer to the microphone, her expression shifting from triumphant pride to a mask of cloying manufactured pity. She looked directly down at me, sitting in the front row. Of course, no family is entirely without its profound challenges. Beatrice sighed heavily, ensuring the entire room could hear the heartbreak in her voice. Sometimes those we welcome into our homes lose their way. They become confused by the heavy pressures of our lifestyle. My daughter-in-law Natalie has been going through a remarkably dark and troubled time recently. She has struggled to understand her proper place within our family structure. The whispers instantly returned, sweeping across the dark ballroom. 200 pairs of eyes shifted from the stage to focus entirely on my bright red maternity gown. However, we are a family of immense grace and endless forgiveness, Beatrice proclaimed, her voice swelling with fake benevolence. Tonight, Natalie has chosen to make a profound public gesture. She has come here to offer a formal apology for her recent actions and to officially surrender her misguided attempts to divide us. She is seeking redemption for her troubled soul, and we are choosing to welcome her back into the fold. Natalie, my dear, please, come up to the stage. Spencer leaned over and nudged my shoulder roughly. Go do exactly what I told you, he hissed in my ear. I stood up slowly, smoothing the heavy silk of my red dress. The entire ballroom was dead silent, watching my every move. I gripped the thick handle of my leather briefcase and walked up the short wooden stairs. I stepped onto the raised platform and walked directly toward Beatrice. She offered me a condescending, victorious smile, holding her hand out to accept the property deed she believed I was carrying. I did not take her hand. I did not look at her. I stepped right past her perfectly manicured, outstretched fingers. I walked directly up to the center podium and placed my heavy leather briefcase down right next to the live microphone. I adjusted the flexible neck of the microphone, pulling it a fraction of an inch closer to my mouth. The ballroom was so incredibly quiet, I could actually hear the faint hum of the electrical feedback vibrating through the sound system. 200 expectant faces stared up at me, waiting for a tearful, emotional breakdown. Beatrice stood just a few feet away, still holding her hand out, her condescending smile perfectly frozen in place, as she waited for her ultimate societal victory. Spencer leaned back in his chair at the table below, crossing his arms with a smug, satisfied look, fully expecting me to hand over the deed to my house and beg for his mercy. Good evening. I began, my voice ringing out clear and commanding, completely devoid of the trembling weakness they had so eagerly anticipated. I looked out over the massive sea of pastel blue and shimmering silver, entirely ignoring my husband and mother-in-law. I bypassed the extended family members who had spent the entire week harassing me and calling me insane. Instead, I locked my gaze directly on the front tables. I recognized the older gentlemen in tailored suits and the elderly women adorned in genuine diamonds. These were Spencer's highest net worth clients. These were the exact people who had entrusted him with their entire life savings and their retirement portfolios. Beatrice brought me up here tonight to talk about family and forgiveness. I continued, resting my hands flat on the polished wood of the heavy podium. She wants me to make a public gesture of total submission to ensure you all feel confident in the absolute integrity of this family. She wants you to look at her spectacular $2 million trust fund and believe that her son is a financial genius capable of securing your wealth for generations to come. A low murmur of genuine confusion rippled through the front tables. This was definitely not the groveling, dramatic apology they had been promised. Beatrice finally dropped her outstretched hand, her polite smile completely cracking. She took a quick step toward me, her silver gown rustling loudly. She whispered fiercely under her breath, demanding that I read the script and hand over the paperwork immediately. I ignored her, stepping slightly to the side, so my bright red dress remained the absolute focal point of the massive room. But the truth is, I am not here to apologize to anyone on this stage, I said, my voice growing much louder, echoing sharply off the crystal chandeliers. I am a senior forensic auditor. My entire professional career is built on investigating corporate theft and exposing financial deception. And as I stand here tonight, looking at the hardworking men and women who have funded my husband's firm for years, I realize that my ethical duty is far more important than protecting a toxic family image. Down at the floor table, the smug expression vanished completely from Spencer's face. He sat bolt upright, knocking his expensive crystal Scotch glass over. The amber liquid spilled across the pristine white silk tablecloth, but he did not even notice. He realized in a split second that the envelope I had shown him in the back room was completely empty. He realized I was not surrendering to his blackmail. I was launching a nuclear strike. "Turn off the microphone," Spencer yelled, jumping to his feet and pointing frantically toward the back of the dark ballroom. "Turn it off right now. Security, get her off the stage immediately." Two large private security guards standing near the heavy mahogany doors immediately started jogging down the center aisle. At the exact same time, the country club sound technician, sitting in the dark audio-visual booth up in the balcony, scrambled to slide the master volume controls down to 0. I gripped the edges of the wooden podium, bracing myself for the audio to cut out. But the dead silence never came. Instead, a sharp, piercing squeal of microphone feedback briefly filled the room, followed by the sound of my own steady breathing, still broadcasting perfectly over the massive house speakers. Up in the shadowy balcony, David had finally made his move. He had physically shoved the panicked sound technician aside and locked the digital soundboard, completely overriding the master controls. He stood there guarding the mixing console with his broad shoulders, ensuring my voice would not be silenced by anyone. Spencer looked up at the balcony and then back at me, pure absolute terror replacing the arrogant rage in his eyes. Beatrice was frozen in total shock, looking wildly between her panicked son and the murmuring crowd of wealthy investors who were now standing up from their chairs. The security guards hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, entirely unsure if they should aggressively tackle a pregnant woman in front of the entire Chicago elite. I took full advantage of their hesitation. I reached down and firmly grabbed the heavy brass zippers of my designer leather briefcase, resting right next to the live microphone. I pulled the zippers open with a loud metallic rasp that echoed cleanly across the silent ballroom. I looked directly into the terrified eyes of Spencer's wealthiest client, sitting in the very front row. "Since we are talking about legacies and trusts tonight," I announced, my voice ringing with undeniable authority, "let us talk about where the $2 million actually came from." I reached into the heavy leather briefcase and pulled out a sleek silver remote control. I had given David the master encrypted flash drive yesterday afternoon. He already had it plugged directly into the main projection system up in the audio-visual booth. I aimed the remote at the back of the room and pressed the primary activation button. Instantly, the massive digital screens hanging behind the head table flickered. The elegant, icy blue winter wonderland graphics that had been displaying Beatrice's family crest completely vanished. In their place, a stark, brightly illuminated forensic financial flowchart appeared, stretching 20 feet across the stage. At the very top right corner of the projection was the glaring red seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, indicating an active criminal submission. The room gasped collectively. I did not give them a single second to recover. "If you look at the screens behind me," I said, projecting my voice clearly over the rising murmurs, you will see the exact anatomical structure of a textbook Ponzi scheme. Spencer needed you all to believe he was a financial visionary, but the truth is, he has not made a successful trade in over 18 months. His primary brokerage account is entirely underwater, and he has been surviving on rolling margin debt. I clicked the remote, transitioning to the next highly detailed slide. It showed a web of offshore routing numbers converging into a single Delaware shell company. To keep up the illusion of immense wealth and to fund the extravagant lifestyle his mother absolutely demands, Spencer began moving your money, I announced, making direct eye contact with an older gentleman sitting in the front row. Mr. Henderson, I audited your primary retirement portfolio. Last month, Spencer liquidated $400,000 of your conservative bonds and funneled the cash directly into his offshore holding account. He told you it was a strategic reinvestment. It was actually used to cover his massive gambling losses on the options market. Mr. Henderson stood up from his chair, his face draining of all color. His wife grabbed his arm, looking absolutely terrified. I clicked the remote again. A new slide appeared, displaying Beatrice's personal banking ledgers and credit card statements alongside the routing numbers for Vanessa's newly announced trust fund. I also brought up the forged home equity line of credit, showing how he stole $300,000 from my own personal property, just to provide the initial seed money to make the grift look legitimate. But covering his trading losses was simply not enough. I continued, my voice slicing through the growing panic in the ballroom. Beatrice required constant luxury to maintain her social standing. Spencer used client funds to pay for his mother's leased diamond jewelry, her luxury condominium fees, and even the $15,000 baby shower hosted last week for his sister. And this magnificent $2 million legacy trust that Beatrice just proudly announced tonight. That money does not belong to her grandson. It belongs to the 25 families sitting in the first 3 rows of this audience. It is your stolen retirement savings sitting in a fraudulent generation skipping trust designed specifically to hide the cash from federal auditors. The polite high society atmosphere of the Oak Brook Country Club completely shattered. The silence was instantly replaced by absolute deafening chaos. Chairs scraped violently against the hardwood floor as dozens of wealthy investors jumped to their feet. Women were screaming at their husbands to call their attorneys. Men were pulling out their smartphones frantically trying to log into their investment portals, only to find the accounts completely locked down by the emergency freezes I had secretly triggered earlier that afternoon. Beatrice stumbled backward, hitting the head table hard. She knocked over a heavy silver candelabra, sending it crashing to the floor. She looked out at her carefully curated list of high society friends who were now staring at her with pure, unadulterated hatred and disgust. Her pristine social empire was burning to the ground in real time right in front of her eyes. Down on the floor, Vanessa burst into hysterical tears, realizing her entire life of luxury was funded by stolen money and was now completely over. Spencer could not take it anymore. The reality of his total destruction finally broke through his arrogant delusion. He scrambled up the short wooden stairs to the stage, his custom tuxedo jacket flying open, his face flushed a dangerous, violently dark red. He lunged toward the podium, but David had anticipated the move. A piercing wall of audio feedback suddenly blasted from the speakers directly above Spencer's head, forcing him to cover his ears and drop to his knees. He scrambled back to his feet, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. He turned toward the enraged crowd of his former clients, his eyes wide with absolute desperation and fear. "Do not listen to a single word she says," Spencer screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking with panic as he tried to project over the deafening noise of the furious crowd. "She is entirely insane. She is having a psychotic breakdown. She fabricated every single one of those documents because she is a bitter, jealous woman trying to ruin my life. It is all a complete lie." Spencer continued screaming his desperate lies, waving his arms frantically and pointing his shaking finger at me. He was desperately trying to convince the furious crowd that I was simply a hysterical pregnant woman making up elaborate financial fairy tales to ruin his reputation. I stood completely still at the podium, letting him dig his grave a few feet deeper, with every single word he shouted. When he paused to take a frantic breath, I slowly raised my right hand and looked up toward the dark audio-visual balcony. I gave David a single sharp nod. The massive digital screens behind us suddenly went completely black. A split second later, a crisp, high-definition audio file began playing through the incredibly powerful country club sound system. It was not a fuzzy recording from months ago. It was the exact conversation Spencer and I had shared just 15 minutes prior inside the private staff lounge. The unmistakable, arrogant voice of my husband echoed across the massive ballroom, silencing the crowd instantly. "You really have no right to make demands right now, Natalie," the recorded Spencer sneered. "You forced my hand. If you had just behaved and transferred the hospital deposit when my mother asked, none of this would have happened." The wealthy investors stopped shouting and strained to listen, their faces twisting in absolute horror. Then came the ultimate, undeniable confession. I needed a massive, immediate cash injection to seed the legacy trust for my nephew. The audio continued, Spencer's voice dripping with condescension. "Forging your signature on the loan application was just a necessary shortcut to get the initial capital I needed to make the entire fund look legitimate." The absolute dead silence that followed the recording was far more terrifying than the previous chaotic shouting. The undeniable proof hung heavy in the cold air of the ballroom. Spencer stood completely frozen on the stage, his mouth opening and closing silently. He could not claim I forged documents anymore. He could not claim I was hallucinating. He could not deny his own voice confessing to a federal crime recorded just moments before he walked out to face his clients. A few feet away, Beatrice stared at her son in sheer absolute horror. The elegant, sophisticated matriarch facade completely melted away, leaving only a terrified, cornered criminal who suddenly realized she was going to spend her golden years sitting in a federal penitentiary. Her basic survival instincts violently kicked in. She turned away from the crowd, attempting to discreetly flee toward the heavy velvet curtains draped at the back of the stage. But in her blind, frantic panic, she completely forgot about the long, trailing hem of her expensive silver evening gown. Her high heel caught fiercely in the heavy silk fabric. She pitched forward, letting out a sharp, undignified shriek, and crashed heavily onto the hard wooden floor of the stage. Her crystal champagne flute shattered violently, sending sharp shards of glass sliding across the polished boards. She sprawled out on the floor, a tangled mess of silver fabric and leased diamonds. Not a single person in the massive room rushed forward to help her up. Down on the floor, the horrifying reality of her shattered illusion finally hit Vanessa. The $2 million legacy she had been bragging about to her friends all week was entirely fake. Her designer maternity clothes, her luxury cars, and her elite status were all purchased with stolen retirement funds. She scrambled up the short wooden stairs to the stage, her face stained with ruined expensive makeup. She did not go to help her fallen mother. Instead, she lunged directly at Spencer. Vanessa grabbed the lapels of his custom tuxedo and began violently shaking him, screaming at the top of her lungs. "You ruined absolutely everything," she shrieked, her voice completely feral and unhinged. "You promised me that money was real. You promised my son was set for life. You are a complete fraud, and you ruined my entire life." Spencer tried frantically to push his hysterical sister away, but she clawed at his chest, crying and screaming about her ruined social standing. The pristine, perfect family image Beatrice had spent decades meticulously cultivating was reduced to a humiliating public brawl on a brightly lit stage in front of the entire Chicago elite. I stepped back from the wooden podium, watching the absolute destruction of the people who had treated me like garbage for years. I had not laid a single hand on them. I had simply handed them the rope and let them tightly tie their own nooses. Down in the audience, the crowd began to surge forward, demanding answers and demanding their stolen money back. Mr. Henderson was shouting loudly for the country club manager to immediately lock the exits, so Spencer could not escape into the night. The chaotic, angry shouting, the sound of Vanessa sobbing hysterically, and Beatrice groaning on the hard floor blended into a deafening roar. But then a sound so incredibly loud and authoritative cut through the entire room that everyone froze simultaneously. The heavy oak doors at the main entrance of the ballroom burst open with a violent echoing crash. A dozen uniformed officers swarmed into the massive ballroom, followed immediately by 4 men wearing dark windbreakers with FBI printed boldly across their backs. The chaotic screaming of the wealthy investors instantly died down, replaced by a stunned silence. Flashing red and blue lights from squad cars parked directly outside illuminated the grand foyer, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. The lead federal agent walked straight down the center aisle. He did not yell or draw a weapon. His mere presence commanded absolute authority. He held up a thick federal warrant with a bright red seal mirroring the exact documents I had projected onto the screen just moments ago. "Nobody leaves this room," he announced, his voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "We are securing this location as an active crime scene." 2 federal agents bypassed the stunned crowd and marched straight up the wooden stairs to the raised platform. Spencer, who was still trying to push a hysterical Vanessa away, completely froze. The sheer reality of the federal raid shattered his arrogant delusion. He raised his hands in a frantic gesture of surrender. "Wait, please, you have to understand," he pleaded, his voice cracking with pathetic terror. "I am a licensed broker. This is a massive misunderstanding. My wife suffered a mental breakdown and fabricated these charges." The lead agent did not even blink. He grabbed Spencer's wrists violently, twisting his arms behind his back. Spencer let out a sharp cry of pain as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked tightly into place, locking his wrists together. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited coldly. "I highly suggest you start using it immediately." The federal agents dragged Spencer toward the edge of the stage. He was forced to walk directly past the front row of tables where Mr. Henderson and the rest of his elite clients stood watching him in absolute disgust. The golden boy of Chicago high society, the brilliant financial mastermind, was now just a terrified criminal in a ruined custom tuxedo, doing the perp walk in front of the very people he had completely betrayed. As the federal agents began pulling laptops and financial ledgers from the country club coat check where Spencer had hidden his real documents, David calmly walked down from the audio-visual balcony. He moved through the crowd with quiet dignity, stepping onto the stage right next to Vanessa. She was kneeling on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her designer makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. She looked up at her husband, expecting him to comfort her or protect her from the absolute nightmare unfolding around them. David did not reach out to help her up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it onto a nearby table. "Those are the emergency divorce papers," David said, his voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of any remaining affection. "I filed them first thing yesterday morning." Vanessa stared at the envelope, her mouth opening and closing in complete shock. "David, you cannot do this to me," she choked out, grabbing the edge of his suit jacket. "We are having a baby. You are supposed to protect us." David gently but firmly pried her fingers off his lapel. "I am protecting my son from growing up in a family built entirely on lies, theft, and deep-seated racism," he replied coldly. "I handed over every single fraudulent appraisal document your mother forced me to sign. I gave the federal prosecutors the complete audio recordings of you and Beatrice making racist comments about me in this very room last Thanksgiving. I am taking full custody of our son Vanessa. You are going to be entirely too busy dealing with federal conspiracy charges to be a mother." David smoothly pulled his gold wedding band off his finger. He held it over the shattered crystal on the stage and dropped it directly into the puddle of spilled champagne. It landed with a dull metallic clink. He turned his back on her completely and walked away without a single backward glance. While Vanessa collapsed into fresh hysterical sobs, a female police officer approached Beatrice, who was still tangled in her heavy silver gown on the hard wooden floor. The officer reached down, grabbing Beatrice's arm to pull her up for formal processing. Instantly, Beatrice let out a piercing, dramatic scream, grabbing her chest with both her manicured hands. She began gasping loudly for air, putting on the absolute performance of a lifetime for the remaining audience. "Do not touch me!" she shrieked, squeezing her eyes tightly shut in fake agony. "I am having a severe cardiac event. You are triggering a massive heart attack right now. I demand that you immediately call my private concierge doctor to save me." The screaming from Beatrice reached a fever pitch as two paramedics pushed through the heavy oak doors, rolling a standard emergency stretcher down the center aisle. They expertly navigated around the furious investors and approached the stage where Beatrice was still clutching her chest and demanding elite medical attention. "Mom, we need to check your vitals, one," paramedic said, shining a small pen light into her wildly darting eyes. "Get that cheap flashlight out of my face!" Beatrice snapped, her miraculous recovery of breath entirely contradicting her claims of a massive cardiac event. "I am a premier platinum donor at Northwestern Memorial. I demand you transport me immediately to their private VIP concierge wing. Vanessa, get my wallet from my silver clutch right now. Give them my black card to cover the private ambulance fee." Vanessa, whose hands were shaking so violently she could barely operate the clasp of the designer bag, pulled out a stack of heavy metal credit cards. She handed the primary black card to the paramedic, who passed it to a hospital intake liaison standing nearby with a mobile dispatch terminal. The liaison swiped the heavy metal card. A harsh, loud beep echoed from the small machine. "It is declined," the liaison stated flatly. "That is absolutely impossible!" Beatrice shrieked, her face turning a deep shade of purple. "Try the gold card. Try the offshore platinum account. You are doing it wrong. I have millions of dollars in available credit." The liaison methodically swiped the second card and then a third. Each time the machine emitted the exact same harsh, declining tone. A federal agent standing near the stage leaned over, looking down at Beatrice with an expression of absolute bureaucratic boredom. "They are not going to work, ma'am," the agent said loudly, ensuring the entire room could hear. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service executed a coordinated asset freeze exactly 1 hour ago. Every single bank account, credit line, offshore holding, and hidden trust fund associated with your name and your son's name has been entirely locked down. You currently have absolutely zero access to any financial resources. The blood drained completely from Beatrice's face, leaving her looking gray and incredibly old. The paramedic strapped a standard blood pressure cuff to her arm. "You are going to Cook County Public Hospital, Mom," the paramedic announced bluntly. "It is the nearest trauma center, and since you cannot provide proof of private insurance or funds, you will be placed in the general emergency ward." "No!" Beatrice wailed, thrashing against the paramedics as they lifted her onto the narrow stretcher. "I cannot go to a public clinic. I am high society. I am Beatrice." Her desperate protests were completely ignored. They strapped her down securely and began wheeling her rapidly down the aisle. She rolled past the front row of tables where her wealthy friends and country club peers stood watching her with cold, unforgiving eyes. The ultimate socialite was being hauled away to a crowded public waiting room, stripped entirely of her wealth, her status, and her dignity. As Beatrice disappeared through the doors, the federal agents forcibly yanked Spencer up from his knees. They began marching him toward the exit, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. As they dragged him past the edge of the stage, he dug his expensive leather shoes deep into the plush carpet, desperately fighting their momentum. He twisted his body around, frantically searching the crowd, until his eyes locked directly onto me. I was standing quietly near the wooden podium, the vivid red silk of my maternity gown contrasting sharply with the chaotic wreckage of the blue and silver ballroom. I did not look angry or sad. I simply looked at him with the cold, detached observation of an auditor reviewing a finalized balance sheet. Natalie Spencer screamed, his voice cracking with absolute raw terror. "Natalie, please, you have to help me. You know the federal codes, you know how to untangle this. Tell them it was just a domestic dispute. Tell them I will pay it all back. Please bail me out. I am your husband. I am the father of your child. I love you. I walked slowly down the short wooden stairs, closing the distance between us until I was standing just a few feet away from him. The federal agents paused for a brief second, allowing the exchange. I looked at the man who had forged my signature, stolen my home equity, and used his unborn daughter's social security number to fund a massive criminal enterprise. I felt absolutely nothing for him. "You really are a fool, Spencer," I said, my voice low, calm, and carrying the heavy weight of absolute finality. "Did you think a forensic auditor would not audit her own husband?" The sheer terror in his eyes solidified into complete, crushing despair as he finally realized the absolute totality of his defeat. He opened his mouth to beg again, but I simply turned my back on him and walked away. The agents jerked him forward, dragging him roughly through the grand foyer and out into the freezing Chicago night, where the flashing red and blue lights waited to swallow him whole. I stood in the center of the shattered ballroom, watching the aftermath. Vanessa was sitting alone on the stage, weeping over a pile of divorce papers. Beatrice was on her way to a public hospital ward, and Spencer was locked inside the back of a federal squad car. The perfect, untouchable family had been completely dismantled right in front of the entire elite society of Chicago, leaving nothing behind but the undeniable truth of their ruin. 3 months have passed since the flashing red and blue police lights illuminated the grand entrance of the Oak Brook Country Club. The federal justice system moves with a brutal, terrifying efficiency when high-profile financial crimes are completely documented and handed over to them on a silver platter. Spencer did not even attempt to take his case to trial. Faced with the overwhelming mountain of digital evidence I had provided, including his own crystal-clear audio confession recorded in the country club lounge, he accepted a federal plea deal. He was officially sentenced to 15 years in a minimum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. His license to trade was permanently revoked, and he was ordered to pay millions of dollars in victim restitution. The arrogant man who had once mocked my sensible maternity clothes and tried to steal my home is now wearing a state-issued orange jumpsuit. Beatrice experienced an even more dramatic and humiliating fall from grace. The federal asset forfeiture protocols were absolutely merciless. They legally seized her luxury Gold Coast condominium, her leased vehicles, and every single piece of designer jewelry she had not already pawned to pay for her initial legal defense. Her wealthy friends completely abandoned her the very moment the scandal broke, treating her name like a highly contagious disease. I heard through David that the former untouchable matriarch of Chicago high society is now living in a cheap weekly motel on the far outskirts of the city. She spends her days bitterly complaining to anyone who will listen about how her ungrateful daughter-in-law completely ruined her life. She still refuses to take a single ounce of responsibility for her own criminal actions. Vanessa was forced to move into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment. Since all the fake trust funds and offshore accounts were seized, she actually had to get an entry-level retail job just to survive. David successfully finalized his divorce, and because of the overwhelming evidence of financial fraud and racial hostility, he was granted full primary custody of their newborn son. He kept his thriving real estate appraisal firm and is raising his boy in a healthy environment far away from the toxic elitism that poisoned his marriage. We occasionally meet for coffee to catch up, and it is wonderful to see the heavy exhaustion completely gone from his face. As for me, I am exactly where I was always meant to be. I am standing inside my beautiful, fully restored home. The house that Spencer tried to steal with a forged signature is now completely legally secure and free of any hidden bank liens. I spent the last few weeks preparing the upstairs nursery. I completely avoided the icy pastel blues and cold silvers that Beatrice so aggressively favored for her events. Instead, I painted the walls a warm, vibrant yellow and filled the room with soft greens and bright pinks. It is a room filled with pure warmth and absolute safety. I look down at the small bundle resting perfectly against my chest. My daughter was born completely healthy exactly 2 weeks ago. She has a fierce little grip that tells me she is already a strong fighter. As I gently rock her to sleep, I think back to that humiliating afternoon at the St. Regis Hotel. I think about Beatrice blocking my path, looking at my pregnant belly with utter disgust. I remember her cruel, arrogant words echoing in my mind. She said having a girl is not our kind of celebration. She told me her family needed a male heir and that we were simply not their kind. She was absolutely right. We are nothing like them at all. My daughter will never know the crushing weight of their conditional love. She will never be used as a financial shield or taught to measure a person's worth by the designer labels they wear. I did not just protect my bank accounts and my property. I surgically eradicated a completely toxic bloodline from her future. I broke the cycle of abuse before she ever had to experience a single second of it. That is the true definition of a legacy. It is not about building a fraudulent empire of wealth to impress strangers. It is about creating a foundation of unshakable truth and absolute security for the people you truly love. As I watch my daughter sleep peacefully in my arms, I know the nightmare is finally and permanently over. The silence in my house is no longer heavy with tension and lies. It is the sweet, silent victory of a woman who stood her ground and won everything that mattered. Thank you for listening to my story all the way to the very end. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to protect your own peace, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments below how you found the strength to rebuild your own life. Remember that you are always stronger than the people who try to tear you down. Never let anyone forge your future. The story of Natalie dismantling her husband's and mother-in-law's web of deceit teaches a profound lesson about the true nature of family loyalty and self-worth. Society often conditions us to believe that family is everything, dictating that we must quietly endure disrespect, financial abuse, and emotional manipulation simply to keep the peace. Beatrice and Spencer weaponized this exact societal expectation. They fully believed Natalie would remain a silent, compliant victim because she was an expectant mother who should value their elitist family image over her own reality. However, the most empowering lesson we can extract from this dramatic saga is that a marriage certificate or shared bloodlines do not give anyone a free pass to destroy your life. Natalie's ultimate victory was not just born from her brilliant forensic accounting skills. It was deeply rooted in her emotional detachment from their toxic approval. Once she stopped trying to win her cruel mother-in-law's validation and stopped making endless excuses for her husband's glaring red flags, she reclaimed her absolute power. She realized that walking away from a poisoned table is never an act of weakness, but rather the ultimate display of self-respect. Protecting your peace, your hard-earned assets, and your children's future sometimes requires you to completely burn the bridge that was built solely to exploit you. True family is built on a foundation of mutual respect, honesty, and safety, not extortion, fake appearances, and manipulation. We must learn to clearly recognize when loyalty is being used as a leash and have the absolute courage to cut it. If you are currently sacrificing your own well-being to keep the peace in a toxic environment, take that first brave step toward setting firm boundaries today.